Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive right into a story that shows how a seemingly ordinary moment can lead to something much bigger. It's a tale about standing your ground, overcoming challenges, and shifting power dynamics in an unexpected way. It was supposed to be just another routine stop, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. A lone motorist driving along the quiet roads was pulled over by two officers eager to flex their authority. They thought they were in charge, ready to assert their power. What they didn't know was that the woman behind the wheel was far more than just another driver. She wasn't just any woman. She was their new boss, the head of the police department. And this seemingly insignificant moment was about to change everything. Kendra Hayes had always been the type of person who exudes quiet strength. She had learned early in life how to overcome obstacles, to rise above challenges that others might have seen as insurmountable. Becoming the chief of police in Cedar View had been her dream for years, a goal she worked relentlessly to achieve. She had fought hard for this position, breaking through barriers in a system that often tried to push people like her into the background. On the morning of her first day as chief, Kendra drove into Cedar View with the early light of dawn casting a warm glow over the landscape. The road twisted before her, and her grip on the steering wheel was a little tighter than usual. Despite the excitement of the day, she couldn't shake a feeling of unease deep in her stomach. Today was supposed to be a day of celebration, but Cedar View wasn't just any town. It had a reputation. The police force had long been plagued with accusations of racism, particularly targeting minorities. Kendra had heard the stories, read the reports. As a black woman now leading the department, she knew there would be resistance. Some officers had already expressed their discontent with her appointment, and Kendra was well aware that this would be no easy road. As she neared a red light, the sudden flash of blue and red lights in her rearview mirror startled her. A police car, sirens blaring, was right behind her. Kendra's heart skipped a beat, and she instinctively knew this wasn't just a random stop. She pulled over, the tires crunching on the shoulder as she slowed to a stop, waiting for what was to come. Two officers approached her car. The senior officer, a man in his late 40s with broad shoulders, moved with a controlled, almost practiced step. The younger officer, a bit more tense, followed close behind, his face twisted with suspicion. Kendra's pulse remained steady, but her eyes remained alert. She knew how to handle situations like this, quiet, calm, and never showing fear. "License and registration," the senior officer demanded, his voice steady, but with a certain coldness that suggested he thought he was in charge of the situation. Kendra remained silent, reaching into her glove compartment and handing over the paperwork. She had learned long ago that, in moments like this, saying nothing was often the best move. The senior officer's gaze lingered on her for a moment, his eyes narrowing, but he said nothing. The younger officer, however, was less restrained. "What brings you out here?" he asked, his voice dripping with distrust. "This area isn't exactly safe, you know." Kendra's stomach churned slightly at the undertone, but she kept her composure. "I'm on my way to work," she replied calmly. The younger officer pressed further, leaning in a little too close. "And where exactly would that be?" he asked, a sneer on his face, as if he already had an idea of who she was and where she belonged. Kendra hesitated for just a moment, a decision running through her mind. She could easily reveal her position, but she chose not to. She knew this was her first day, and causing trouble with the officer she would soon be leading wasn't the best way to start. It was a power dynamic she understood too well. "You'll find out soon enough," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. She held the younger officer's gaze, her eyes steady and unafraid. The senior officer, sensing the tension building, stepped in. "Let's not make things more difficult for you, ma'am," he said, trying to sound authoritative. "If it's necessary, we can take this further." It was then that Kendra's patience began to wear thin. For years, she had endured these kinds of subtle and sometimes not so subtle displays of superiority. She had been looked down upon, underestimated, and dismissed, simply because of the color of her skin. But she had fought too hard to let this moment slide by unnoticed. With a deep breath, Kendra decided it was time to stop playing along. "That won't be necessary," she said, her voice firm. "My name is Chief Kendra Hayes. I suggest you reconsider how you're handling this situation." The change in the air was instant. The senior officer froze, his face betraying a mix of surprise and confusion. The younger officer's smugness quickly shifted to shock, his expression flickering between disbelief and a hint of fear. Kendra could almost feel the weight of the moment settle around them, the power shift palpable. What had started as an ordinary traffic stop had just turned into something much bigger. The senior officer's voice cracked in disbelief. "You're the chief?" The question hung in the air, laced with a tinge of surprise as it became painfully clear that he hadn't expected this encounter. Kendra stood her ground, her voice firm, carrying an edge of authority that left no room for doubt. "Yes," she replied, her tone leaving no space for further argument. It was not necessary for her to wait for him to collect his thoughts. "I'd like to know why I was stopped, and why you feel the need to ask me these questions in the first place." Two cops looked at each other, each of them taken aback by the other's sudden appearance. The more junior officer tripped over his words, indicating that he was having a difficult time coming up with an answer. Kendra was able to sense the change in power within the circumstance. She had taken control of the situation, and they were both aware of this fact. Clearing his throat a few times as he sought to calm himself, the senior officer made an effort to restore some of his composure. Under his breath, he said, "There must have been some misunderstanding," presenting an explanation that he thought would be taken seriously as sufficient justification. In spite of this, Kendra was not going to accept it. Before he could complete his sentence, she interrupted him. "No," she retorted with angularity. "According to me, this is not a misunderstanding. The problem that we are attempting to solve is precisely this one." Despite the fact that her remarks were filled with rage, they also conveyed a feeling of clarity. "You stop people like me without cause, make assumptions based on nothing but your biases, and use your badge to flex your power because you think you can get away with it." When the senior officer tried to speak, he discovered that his voice was suffering from a lack of strength. He had no doubt that she was correct. He had no words to justify his behavior since there was nothing he could say. Despite the fact that Kendra maintained her composure and steadfastness, their acts seemed to be much more despicable. As she proceeded, her stare remained unmoving as she directed her attention squarely into their eyes. The words that she said were thoughtful and strong. "You see, it is officers like you who are the reason that people lose trust in the system," she began. "And individuals like me are the ones who are here to make that right." The two cops continued to stand there motionless, their faces devoid of any color. The weight of Kendra's determination was weighing down on them, and the quiet that had been there between them became even more profound as her words sank in between them. She came to the realization that this moment was not just about her. Rather, it was about every single person who had been wrongfully held, questioned, or harassed simply due to the fact that they did not conform to a certain preconceived notion of who should be permitted to function in particular locations. When Kendra emerged from the van, she did so with a confident stance. It seemed as if her presence alone occupied more space, occupying their attention, not just because she was a woman, but also because she was someone who was determined to accomplish what she set out to do. She made the announcement with a feeling of finality. "For the next few weeks, you will be reporting directly to me," and her voice sliced through the air with precision. My attention will be focused on each and every traffic stop that you make. From this point forward, I strongly recommend that you give great consideration to how you behave yourself." Despite the fact that his comments lacked the confidence that he had previously carried, the senior officer, who was now visibly shaken, eventually managed to speak. "We sincerely apologize for any disrespect that we may have caused, Chief. It is not going to happen again." Despite the fact that she nodded, Kendra did not recognize his apologies in any way. The fact that their pledges meant virtually little was something that she was well aware of. It was after she established the tone for the whole department that the actual work would start occurring. Within the Cedar View Police Department, she would erase the deeply rooted biases that had been allowed to fester for an excess of time. "Good," she murmured in a tone that was steady and low before turning around and heading back to her car. Her thoughts were already beginning to move to the duty that was yet to come. During the time that she was driving away, Kendra took a minute to gather her thoughts. A sensation of success was there, despite the fact that the tension from the meeting was still very much present. This was the first round that she had won, but she was aware that it was only the beginning. She considered the position of chief of police to be more than simply a ceremonial obligation. Rather, it was a responsibility that she felt she had earned. A duty to make certain that no one else would be put in the position of having to go through what she had just accomplished. Kendra took the initiative to convene a meeting of the whole department that same evening. The room was filled with an intensity that could not be denied as she stood in front of them. Without a doubt, there was no place for indecision, and there was no room for distraction. She was able to capture everyone's attention, and she would make certain that they experienced her message in a way that was unmistakable. The truth was not masked by her soft words. There was no aspect of the truth that she omitted from her account of the contact she had with the cops earlier that day. Kendra's tone was firm and serene as she said, "I'm not here to embarrass anyone. However, I am here to put it beyond any reasonable doubt that this conduct must cease immediately. Regardless of the individual's ethnicity, gender, or background, each and every officer in this department will be held responsible for the manner in which they treat the residents of Cedar View." Kendra did not show any signs of hesitance despite the fact that the room was filled with a murmur of pain. She was willing to take a bold stance on what was right, regardless of the consequences, since she had devoted her whole life to the pursuit of justice. She continued, her eyes moving over each of them, and said, "This is your opportunity to demonstrate that you are officers of integrity. I want to make it quite clear that I will not accept any kind of partiality or disrespect. In addition, I will not let anybody fool themselves into thinking that they are above the law." The room became completely quiet. While several cops squirmed uncomfortably in their chairs, others nodded their heads, an expression of unspoken agreement appearing on their features. Kendra was able to see the dividing line that was developing between people who were prepared to support her and others who most likely were not. Nevertheless, it was irrelevant. She was determined to go on regardless of whether or not they supported her. She was here to make things different, and she was prepared to take on the task that was presented to her. Over the course of the subsequent weeks, the whole town became aware of Kendra's interaction with the two law enforcement officials. To some, it was the beginning of a transformation that had been anticipated for a very long time. Others saw it as a wake-up call, a realization that things could not continue in the same manner as they had been. It was an eye-opener. Kendra became a symbol once the media received information about the tragedy. Now, she was the most visible representation of the transformation that Cedar View required. Her commitment to deconstructing a flawed system, one step at a time, was unwavering, and she did not shy away from speaking up against the injustice that she had been subjected to. However, Kendra was aware that this was only the beginning of things. The path that lay ahead would be not only lengthy, but also fraught with challenges. Her vigilant eye would be on each and every traffic stop, each and every conversation, and each and every decision that the police made. The weight of the task was significant, but she had made preparations for it. She had not spent years working for justice, just to be silenced now. She had not been silenced. Kendra knew one thing for certain as she drove away from the interaction with those two cops, recalling the ashamed expressions on their faces. She was precisely where she needed to be at that moment. It was impossible to go back at that point.